So good morning to everybody. I'm very glad to be with you this morning to talk about the work. And we have quite a lot of work to cover from the OECD Mission Action Lab as well. So I'm very glad to be here with you this morning with a group of people that is also very passionate about implementing social change. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview about the lab in general, what we do, what our tasks are, what our priorities are, what we find important in this space. And then I'm going to also talk a little bit about when to actually use an instrument like the missions, when a mission-oriented approach is appropriate. So we have been working on this as well. And then I'll go into the kind of the nitty-gritty of the implementation process as long as the time allows to actually give you an overview about what is important for a successful and effective implementation of a mission-oriented approach. So first of all, what about the OECD Mission Action Lab? So already some years ago, as introduced, we created a joint action lab at the OECD, crossing different directorates. So we work across the governance directorate, the Observatory Public Sector Innovation, where we record kind of the up-to-date or state-of-the-art of public sector innovation, what is going on and how public sectors are innovating in its entirety. We have the Directorate of Science, Technology and Innovation, who have been following up on kind of challenge-led innovation and science and technology-led missions for quite some time. And then we also include in our initiative the Development Cooperation Directorate as well, because we not only follow missions that are going on in OECD countries on different levels, we also are monitoring mission-oriented approaches across the globe, because there is a lot to learn from lower and middle income countries as well in terms of mission approaches. So what we do at the lab is we have kind of a three-form orientation. We do, of course, as kind of general or traditional OECD, we do analysis on the state of the art of our mission-oriented approaches. So we do our own research. But as this is very much a kind of an emerging field, we also do quite a lot of action research. So a joint team, so at the OECD Mission Action Lab, we're a joint team that crosses different directorates. So Directorate of Governance, Directorate of Science, Technology and Innovation, and the Development and Cooperation Directorate. So we can basically working across three different functions. So we do research, we do also action research where we actually participate in mission-oriented approaches. So help countries and different stakeholders in the mission space to implement and put in place mission-oriented innovations, and also participate in kind of designing, refining, and implementing the processes. So we also have a kind of a participatory and advisory function within the OECD itself. And how it works in practice, we do, as said, quite a lot of research in practice as well. What are missions in its entirety? So there are a lot of course, mission-oriented activities within government, where we have governments kind of aligning activities to kind of mission-oriented, the target-oriented, the challenge-oriented approaches. But when we're talking about mission as an instrument, then it does have to follow, at least from the OECD's perspective, specific criteria, like what makes a concrete mission. So it has to be targeted in precisely, so has an easy or understandable goal. So what do we actually want to achieve with this mission? And by the end of it, it would be very good if we could actually say yes or no, we achieved this goal or we didn't achieve this goal. So a yes or no answer is a kind of a good test in terms of setting up a mission. A good mission should also be time-bound, that we actually commit to a certain time frame. When do we want to accomplish this mission at hand? So clear time connected to that. And missions in general, as they are quite difficult to actually do in terms of the change that we want to implement, then they should be by design also ambitious. So it aims to achieve that are kind of cross-cutting or collaborative, that we are ambitious in the targets that we actually set. Because if we're not ambitious, there are other instruments and measures that we can implement to actually reach those targets at hand. So when we're talking about missions, then we're also talking about ambitious societal cross-cutting goals that are targeted and time-bound in nature. And an example that I bring from here, it's quite specific, but for example, in Norway, they have set a mission that all animal feed comes from sustainable sources from 2030. And it sounds quite narrow or specific, but if you actually know the context of Norwegian economy, then they have huge kind of their GDP in terms of huge input from fisheries as well. So they have huge sources and CO2 emissions coming from actually the fisheries themselves. And it is quite an ambitious target to actually get all these sources from sustainable sources as well. It's very concrete, it is very time-bound, but it actually requires innovation to do and for different parties to actually work together to make it happen in practice. And in terms of missions themselves that we see in practice, that usually they're quite complex. And this information on the slide actually exemplifies that we see that usually they cross different levels of government, be it local level, regional or national level. Even if, for example, a mission is set on a national level, there are usually regulatory barriers or interest on a national level that need to be also aligned and vice versa. And there are various different actors that need to be involved. And usually there are also cross-cutting of different boundaries as well that require various tasks for governments to actually do to get to those missions. And usually, because we have also the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate involved, a lot of the early missions, at least that were set mid-2010s, they were kind of oriented towards R&D activities or STI activities, science, technology, and innovation activities. But actually, there is kind of in the space known a concept of an STI trap that we don't want to, because we're talking about societal challenges, big issues where we're actually using innovation and science for societal goals and challenges of reaching them, then usually you actually have to go beyond research and development policies to reach the missions themselves. And that is also what we see at the moment in terms of EU missions, the big 5 missions of cancer, climate, and so forth. They are originating from the space of R&D or research and development funding. But what is increasingly clear is that you need other partners to actually implement or accelerate those changes in practice to scale up those innovations to actually make the mission goals active. And then what makes a good mission? So we had the 3 components or simple criteria of what the missions should look like, but when to actually consider a mission-oriented approach. So we have at the lab, because we also are working together with quite a lot of governments that are considering adopting a mission-oriented approach. So we also developed a kind of a litmus test or a test of when to do a mission. So we get this common question quite a lot from our policymakers. And as these are quite significant strategic long-term commitments, and they have quite a lot of big costs connected to them. So in terms of complexity and coordination that you actually have to do these missions, you have to commit to it. So we don't want to have, like, everything shouldn't become a mission. You have other tools in terms of challenges or prizes or hackathons or other simple measures that you can actually tackle single problems at hand that you have towards a target that you want to achieve. But this kind of like a commitment on the mission level, we want to have it where the expectations also are high and the commitment is high connected to that. And for this, to actually we have developed a simple test with our community of practice and also kind of tested it out with real mission practitioners and those who are considering missions. And I'll quickly go through it, but I don't go into detail. It's Creative Commons, so we are soon making it also available as a tool for everybody in the community. But we have a kind of a 4-step analysis about when to kind of how to actually see if your challenge fits a mission-oriented approach. So is it systemic in nature? Is it compelling? So is it consequential, and does it have meaningful impacts to citizens? And can we actually communicate that in a way? Because later on, as I say, to actually implement or activize a mission or make it happen, you have to have these narratives or communication narratives that are very impactful and easy to also communicate, to activize kind of industry, third sector, and otherwise to make it happen. Is it also complex in a sense that if you have a easy, simple task to fulfill, then you have other measures. You don't have to set up a mission on a very high level to make it happen. So you can just solve the problem. And does it fall in some way into a remit? So if you are working at a certain ministry or otherwise, do you actually have a connection or a partial ownership of the problem? So can you start influencing what is happening in this space? The step 2 is also to really to think about support. Is there a broad support to address this problem, challenge in terms of kind of stakeholders? Do you have championing stakeholders that you can support from initiating the mission from the get-go? Do you have not at the beginning yet maybe the adequate resources to solve the mission, but do you have at least the starter capital of resources or where you can organize them to really complement the mission at hand? And last but not least, you also have political backing. So there are different ways to also communicate and sell to missions to political leaders, but it's important for sustainability of missions, because what we have seen as well is that if missions really have those cutoff points of political cycles, so missions usually take longer than the usual 3 to 4 years, which means that you have to have support the missions across policy cycles as well, which means that if there are only one party dominated, supported by one party or political movement, then you really have to really think about as well as that how the sustainability across political terms can be sustained. So what makes mission actually sustainable? And third step, can you formulate an overarching objective to address this challenge in a way that also responds to these 3 different criteria that I mentioned? But is it specific enough? That what we see as well is that we see a lot of mission-oriented policies being made in the climate space where we just say net zero. But this doesn't really seem to be very activizing, in a sense that it becomes too broad for any actor actually to kind of coalesce around, and there becomes kind of a generalization paralysis for different actors. So we have to, in terms of like specific missions, there can be a kind of net zero goal that you have in government, but more specific missions below that. So what do we actually, in a mission-oriented approach, are trying to achieve? So think about kind of sustainability, animal feed, or more kind of these realistic goals. So as I said, missions should be ambitious, so they should be bold, but they should also be realistic in terms. So we don't, in a sense that in the 1950s, it was realistic that we were getting to the moon because the technology was already developing at a fast pace towards those that we were having scientific solutions to solve these issues. So also to think about then in a space that do we have at least some inclination, if innovation in the space is needed, do we have the science base or options or solutions that could be potentially a solution for this problem that I'm facing? So actually knowing the space, because if your mission is very kind of basic science oriented, you say that you want to teleport from one area to another, it becomes quite unrealistic, and you can't really bound your problem as such, and it isn't a very good area for actually a mission oriented approach. And I would say as well is that is it measurable? Can we actually say, very mostly simplistically say, or yes or no? Can we actually showcase that we have solved the problem at hand? Because this is something that is really needed for early communication and later communication as well. Why are we actually solving this mission as such? And last but not least, the component of the time bound. Can we actually make commitments in a certain time frame to reach the mission at hand? And last step that we usually have our mission teams who are considering doing missions or stating missions to go through is the commitment level. So are you able to commit to this objective in terms of a dedicated team, operational team to put behind the mission? Because one of the challenges we really see, successful missions that we have followed usually have this dedicated task force or operational team that is there for the whole duration of the mission itself. And often these transformation teams are cross-cutting, they're put together to like experts from different fields, depending on the mission teams or mission needs at hand as well. And usually missions that kind of not moving or not effective in practice, we see as well, these are those who are lacking these kind of functional teams behind them to actually deliver on the mission, who have the responsibility and also accountability for the delivery of the mission at hand. And can you also commit in terms of allocating funding, or you have a plan for the allocated funding? Because solving big problems actually also requires resources. It requires resources to crowd in resources and different instruments. And you also have access to key policy instruments at hand. So kind of the traditional example that we bring at this stage is cancer mission, for example, in the EU, that we have a big cancer mission. We also know what the most effective instruments in terms of solving cancer are for the long term would be actually banning alcohol, not smoking anymore. But these policy instruments are not viable or accessible to the mission team. So they're dealing with the kind of the later stage problems about detection and mitigation effects, but they're not actually really tackling the big causes of cancer that you actually know of, because they are not viable policy instruments at hand. So really it requires you to also know or do the pre-analysis of the problem at hand before committing to a mission precisely as well. So if you say yes to all of the above, then actually a lot of problems fit this space, then you have the right approach and you should go forward with the mission as well. So we have various different actors, for example, in the Innovatech UK. So in the launch of the next elections and in anticipation of the election results in the UK, a lot of different actors, Innovate UK, Nesta and others, have been actually preparing missions for transforming existing industries, supporting regional growth and otherwise. And they have been doing similar, they have had similar considerations that I talked about in terms of actually designing the right approach or the right also challenge for the mission at hand as well. So creating for the minimal viable product for the perfect mission. So these are some of the resources that you can follow up and look into afterwards as well. So once you have a mission, you have a mission that also is a kind of a good statement of mission that is time-bound, that is specific enough, that is ambitious, and that is can really say yes or no in terms of delivering it. How do you go about actually implementing the missions? And here we see a huge variety of approaches that have emerged with very different scale scopes, from national to subnational to different domains and different ways of actually doing mission-oriented approaches. And kind of very broad division that we have done, but actually the real life is more complicated. We see 4 very broad different approaches, from top-down to bottom-up mission-oriented approaches as well. So from the bottom up, from the below, we see a lot of kind of ecosystem-based mission programs, and these are usually, we see them very much in Nordic countries. So where a ministry or agency is funding first the creation of a coalition around the mission-oriented approach. So they have mission areas or specific missions that they want to tackle, but they, in kind of a decentralized Nordic context, they know that they are kind of lacking the means to do so. Then they have a stepwise approach to actually initiating the mission. So the first fund, for example, a year or so, the creation of the coalition and the roadmap or the theory of change and how to reach that, and for external partners, both public and private, and also research partners, to create or design like how they would reach this mission. And then they would come for the second stage of funding or challenges to actually reach or apply for kind of the scale up of the mission itself. So the government directly is kind of initiating the missions and the ecosystems around that, but it's not in the kind of delivery function of that based on, and it's very common, for example, impact programs in Sweden, also in Norway, their mission in terms of child well-being and has been initiated in that way that they have an initiation stage to activize the ecosystem to actually create the management structure of how they would do it and the plans for it. So give it a little bit of leeway to kind of design the approaches on the mission, and then they would actually fund the missions themselves. And from that, from the kind of the other very like top-down mission side as well, is that when we also see kind of central agencies and committees running missions themselves. And this is quite common, like, for example, in Japan, in Germany, in the Netherlands, where you have mission-driven top sectors, high-tech strategies, moonshot programs, which are kind of delivered or are centric for the government itself, and they are running those from the center. So there are positive and negative sides on both in terms of the kind of the delivery, but it's also very much dependent on the administrative structure that these missions are coming from. And in between, you have a mix of challenge-led programs that usually are, or thematic-led programs that are usually instituted through agencies, because they usually have access to mostly funding and collaboration creation and ecosystem creation, but they do not have access to, for example, regulatory means and other policy instruments as well. And a specific area where we see a huge amount of different missions coming up, for example, is of course net zero missions, and OECD has a variety of different reports and resources that actually describe the net zero missions as well. Our recent science technology outlook as well described the mission-oriented approaches. Is readily available also on the OECD website as well. And we will have later this year a science technology report on net zero missions and the different approaches different countries are using for those, and also a kind of a green book on mission governance and how to kind of put missions into climate change and governance connected to that. But once again, you are thinking about the different structures, you're actually analyzing what would work best. So you come to the kind of the question how to manage them in practice as well. And while we see that there are like the structures that the OECD usually looks at, we looked at the strategic agendas, the structures of governance for the missions themselves, what kind of policy mixes they have access to, how they do mission portfolio management as well in terms of implementation, in terms of the analysis that we do on the missions themselves. What we find the most important in terms of actually making those implementation structures is having a good theory of change below that. And you don't have to, we call it, we have used this theory of change, not all missions actually use a theory of change, but there needs to be an understanding of the problem that you're facing. So what type of what is our knowledge base about this problem at hand? What instruments do we think in the time frame that we have, of resources that we have, will affect how objectively and effectively this mission will be achieved? And this usually should be kind of an evolving theory of change, because usually we don't know all the solutions at the get-go, but really the mission structures and mission approaches that come from should be mission specific and specific to the theory of change at hand. So some missions actually require the whole society, or you need to engage or change how citizens are involved or civic engagement involved. But some missions are very specific to industry. So you don't need a lot of engagement or actors connected to that. So those issues should be really kind of made clear in your theory of change as well, in terms of how to actually do that. And you can use different tools. You can use backcasting design tools or systemic design to really look at how, based on the problem that we have at hand and the theory of change connected to that mission, how we can actually design the course of interventions that will, in a time-bound way, deliver us the change that we see happening. And then all of the governance structures should be then kind of a reflection of that theory of change. So we don't actually suggest from the OECD side that there's one standard of best way of governing missions. We are actually looking at does the problem that you're trying to solve in terms of a mission fit the theory of change that you have in place? So do we need, what type of frameworks, mandates, leadership do we need, resources, capabilities, like how are these different components actually delivered? And have you considered them in terms of delivering your theory of change in practice as well? So we do this analysis, we have done this analysis across different kind of levels of government in terms of how they deliver and what problems they have and what access to the policy instruments they have. So it's not always the same in terms of kind of delivery of those approaches, because you have a lot of different ways of actually working. And one of the examples that, for example, the city of Dublin that we are advising at the moment, and they were part of our community of practice as well, is that while they had very big, lofty goals in terms of climate neutral Dublin 2030, then they also decided to go below and define very concrete missions connected to that, and started to work also with us in terms of launching concrete missions below that the climate neutral goal at hand. And then also designing, based on the theories of change, the challenge delivery teams of kind of how different units of the city would come together to actually deliver on this mission, and setting up a specific communication strategy for each of the missions at hand, workshop with the ecosystems based on what is needed, and using different design tools from systems design that are really connected to, like, the tools differ between the missions because they're kind of also the usefulness for different missions is different. And so this we see also in practice in different types of missions in France, from Sweden, from the Netherlands, where specifically in terms of the type of the mission, the theory of change, different methodologies are used, from kind of bottom-up design-led approaches where the problem actually lies with kind of citizen behavior, user patterns, when you use kind of behavioral insights or different types of design perspective to really understand user behavior or behavior in general, how to change that. Or we are working together with kind of industry-led changes where we need different tools to actually know what type of instruments would work to activize industry at hand as well in terms of those changes. And what we do in terms of from the perspective of the lab, then we look at different design principles as well. We don't say that there is a right way of doing it, but we look at the variety of design principles and see how well a mission has actually accomplished in delivering, for example, directionality and intentionality within a mission, how they are able to make funds available, flexibility available towards that specific mission. So how they actually use those different components for delivery of the mission to give basically an answer, how confident we are in terms of that mission actually being delivered at hand. Because it's also an answer that, for example, your senior leaders or leadership should be asking in terms of that. So if you're investing in this approach, it's very much time-bound. We want to see these challenges solved. Then we also have to analyze the different kind of components to see, have we made the right commitments? Do they align continuously with our theory of change? Do we need to increase interaction? Do we need to increase work in this space to actually be confident that we reach the results that we want to reach? And these are the criteria where, for example, we have used to analyze 5 different missions in Austria, for example, from cities, cancer, climate, water-related missions as well, to then use it kind of this as an assessment or diagnostics to say that how do you actually delivering them, what needs to be changed to increase our confidence as well that the mission delivery across different variety of mission contexts actually derails the results that we want to have. And here also in terms of like, if we go top layer lower in terms of the kind of the mission management context as well, what we also see very important and the important barrier for actually achieving missions is the ability for public organizations to also manage portfolios in terms of delivering those missions. And when we are really talking about portfolios, is the understanding that the mission manager or mission management team has the possibility to analyze these different instruments that they probably have defined also in their theories of change. Some may be in their control, some may not be in their control, but how do we actually convince others and also align synergies between different projects and activities that are core to the mission delivery as well. So this is also something that is quite an emergent field that is difficult for governments to implement. But it's usually also the kind of the engine behind the mission, when the mission becomes actually not just a nice strategy or a forum to talk around the specific challenge, but where we actually start to find synergies between different programs, measures, or single such projects to actually realize the mission at hand and learn from the different initiatives, and also making choices in terms of the types of activities that we support. And this can usually, in big organizations, this is very static. So you actually tag or identify and map your current activities in terms of our mission oriented. And that's the first stage. But the second stage that we work with more advanced mission practitioners and mission managers is the kind of proactive mission portfolio management. For example, Nesta in the UK or Zero in Australia, that they have very practical portfolio management approaches and tools to actually manage those intricacies between kind of mission-oriented approaches of building a portfolio of activities connected to a mission, implementing that, so tracking how different projects are proceeding or are moving in terms of the mission goal at hand, and what types of executive leadership or kind of revisiting the theories of change are needed, what kind of practices or frameworks are put in place in terms of kind of delivery of the mission at hand. So at any point of the mission journey, we can have confidence level to also report to our senior leadership to show are we confident or not confident that this mission will be achieved within the time frame that is connected to those goals at hand. And this is in terms of governance levels, we have see a variety of mission teams and approaches that do it in different ways, and we have a lot of material on these effects. But it's very important to actually also follow up and evaluate continuously when you're actually designing and using different methodologies, from going theories of change to actually using different types of design tools based on the problem at hand you have, to really look at what is going on in a mission level. And for us at the OECD, we have, with the experts that we are working with, we have outlined 4 different types of effects or evaluation criteria that we are very, very interested in, because these are usually the predictors of why missions fail or where missions start to fail as well. So we look at directionality effects in terms of evaluation. So how good missions are in mobilizing different resources behind them, how good they are in terms of really describing the intention that they have, and how flexible they actually have, which is kind of a contradiction, but you have to have a little bit of flexibility in terms of like if the interest of industry changes, but how flexible you are to make changes connected to that. And I would say that usually on the second, third year, it is really important in terms of mission delivery to overlook also governance effects. So how collaborative steering, resource mobilization, allocation, so forth is happening, because usually, even if the mission is good, even if there is funding behind that, sometimes and often these governance effects of a lack of good governance or management of missions is the one that actually starts to really influence if a mission succeeds or doesn't succeed. And then we, in terms of the practice of everyday practice, we actually also encourage to look at portfolio level effects. So how the mission management team is able to ensure that the initiatives that there are, or projects that they're funding or supporting are consistent. Are they able to also fund exploration? So if we don't know a certain part of kind of how a mission should be achieved, what solutions should work best, so can we have an exploratory part of the portfolio, and how do we learn from that? And last but not least, it is important to also keep in mind the substantive effects. Like, is the mission actually going to deliver the effect that we want to see? We look at effectiveness, impact, and transformation connected to those areas as well. And things to look out for, the last but not least, in terms of where missions actually fail or where they don't succeed. Already in 2021, we had a first round of surveys with our mission practitioners across 40 different countries. And a lot of these effects that I talked about in the effects of silos, which is really like a governance effect that you need to define, from incumbent bias, lack of agility, and so forth, these effects that I encourage to evaluate when you are applying missions, these are really important in terms of what the community also sees as the reasons why missionary approaches are not working. And recently as well, some months ago, we also outlined 13 different reasons why we see that the missions fail in practice as well. Some of them are very kind of the starting phase, how seriously actually a mission-oriented approach is taken in countries, for example. So are missions used for kind of just relabeling current challenges, that nothing behind actually the delivery structure or how missions are run is not changing. So we see a lot of mission happening and dilution within the system as well. And if there is not a lot of commitment or the right resources behind missions, then there are also a mission fatigue, also like tiredness with missions also sets in at some points as well. And I really wanted to make a case for this, that really evaluate the areas that you want to have a mission-oriented approach. It's because missions are not the cure-all or a policy solution for everything. So not all policy problems actually fit the mission-oriented approach. So that's why we had this quite elaborate diagnostic to say, or litmus test to say, like, is this the right area to actually do a mission? Because it's a really kind of also political, highly communicatable commitment that you're actually taking those approaches towards. And then we really have to also look at the kind of the mission conditions and using different tools. So as I said, develop first the theory of change. Like how are you currently, based on the current knowledge that you have, how are you actually going to, which instruments do you think that are working, which instruments we need to experiment with to do this work or reach this mission at hand, and what kind of investments we need to have in place, and who, in terms of stakeholders, we have in place to do that. And usually based on the missions, as I said, missions are different. You need different design tools and methodologies, from systemic design to future-oriented design to co-creative design and so forth, based on the problem at hand, to actually deploy the mission or come up with a kind of action plan for the mission as well. And when those conditions in terms of like who needs to be involved for the critical stakeholders of the missions are missing, then usually it's also a precursor of why missions fail. A lot of the kind of the failure aspects here are also connected to the fact that if you remain too siloed, so usually, as I said, the STI track, or science, technology, innovation track, is that if you only try to achieve a mission based on kind of scientific funding, for example, in the case of EU missions as well, that really face the problem that they have a lot of money in terms of research funding, but actually a lot of these missions that they're working on, they need to accelerate, scale up, and actually use the applications that are already being developed to reach the mission at hand. So really something to, from the get-go, to think about. And then we also see problems with kind of open missions, that we don't have like a single shot missions that don't have a lot of kind of support or supporting activities. As I mentioned, there's one tool missions where you have a funding tool or others, but no access to other types of problems. And also when you don't have a very good overview of the overall portfolio. So a mission management team, we're working with mission management teams, need to really have a good overview about their own portfolio, so things that they in their activities and investments can achieve, but they also need to have an overview about their nested portfolio. So what other participants, stakeholders are doing that are contributing to the mission. And here we really say, but the mission team has the kind of responsibility. So if the stakeholders are not working, you really can't complain about it. You have to say, what do I need to do to get the other stakeholders involved? Because you are de facto, the mission management team should have, the task force should have the responsibility of the delivery of the mission itself as well. So they should have the responsibility of taking actions as well. And I talked already about the overly politically dependent missions, kind of ensuring the sustainability of those missions as well, because we need to have resources and systemic tools behind those approaches. And all of this we are actually discussing with our community of practice. So last, I wanted to invite you all to join us. We have a community of practice at the OECD that connects specifically mission practitioners. So this is our kind of gateway to the community, is that you have to have at least a starting mission or a mission that you're working on there. We have over 200 or close to 300 participants across the world that are actually doing specific missions. We meet once a month with a short meeting, but we share a lot of resources between the meetings on the practical approaches that the missions actually share. And we have our own kind of a mirror sharing point as well, where all the mission practitioners can introduce themselves, their missions, and also the tools and methods that they have developed in their current context. So thank you for now, and I'm open for questions. There's a lot to actually share from this space. So I only could give you a very brief overview about the work that we're doing. Thank you so much.